my co-host, Ted Sumner. Ted, are you there, sir?
I am. Can you hear me, Mills?
We can hear just fine. Now, since we last talked, you've had an opportunity to talk with a number of other people in law enforcement. And what have you learned?
Well, there's lots of things going on. I do have Russ Jones coming on. He has unique insight about the pension quandary that they're facing in San Jose, how certain decisions were made that led inevitably to this condition. And so we'll be discussing that with him in just a few minutes. They are desperately looking for qualified people. The department is at virtually minimum staff right now. And of course, with the problems they had, many other departments took the opportunity to hire some of their more qualified and better people. So they're in even more trouble than it might have been had it just been the pension problem.
What are the requirements?
Well, to be an officer, you have to be 21 years old. You have to pass the written exam. You have to have either an AA degree or 60 units in that particular field, which is administration of justice. You have to pass a physical agility, and a background. And then you're put on a list. And when there's an opening, they contact you. They give you a couple of weeks. And if you can get your life in order in that time and enter the academy, well, then you will take the training. It's a 6-month training program, followed by 6 months in the field, in a field training program, where you're out working with a training officer. And then during that time, you're at will. They can release you for no reason at all, although they always give you one. After that, then you're finished with you have another 6 months of probation, and then you become a full-time officer.
So old duffers like me need not apply.
They don't take any applications over 35. So you
that takes
could
care
apply,
of 3 of me.
You know, they take your application. It's a young man's job. You wouldn't want to do that anyway.
Oh, heck.
just the hours, being out in the elements, going from dead calm in the middle of the night, nearly falling asleep, to a total adrenaline tidal wave. It's a young man's job.
So it would seem. Us old instructors, we just fade away. Let's make sure that everybody knows how to tune in. If you're listening on a computer, you must pick up a phone of any kind. If it's a cell phone, you just dial the rest of the number. If it's a hard line connected to the wall, you dial 1 first, which is our nation code. The rest of the number is 701-801-0829. Now, if you're listening on your phone, that means you've dialed 701-801-0829. And if you hear the show on your phone, you can just dial 5, and that will bring you up on our computer, and we'll know you're ready to talk. And I assume that your guests know how to get on.
Well, I certainly hope so. He'll be on about 10 after.
Excellent. Now, we have in front of me a copy of Deep Cover Cop, which is the true story of Ted Sumner's life in the field and on the line. And we're going to award a copy of this to one of you who call in. And we will give a copy of this to someone every Thursday. And I've got a case of these ready to go. And in the meantime, most of you are going to want to get a copy for yourself. And you can get that by going to Deep Cover Cop. I read one of the incidences when you took on the president, El Prez. I read that incident to the audience yesterday to give them a little flavor of what was going on. How many times did you run afoul of the Hells Angels?
Well, they had a pretty large chapter in San Jose. They generally did not fly their colors when they were in the city of San Jose because we had a policy that we would stop them. The chief didn't like that. So out there working at night in certain parts of town, it's pretty hard not to run into them. We had one particular incident where they rented a house and a group of them moved in 2 doors down from our chief of detectives in a nice neighborhood in the Willow Glen area of San Jose. That didn't go over very well.
I would think 2 doors over, wonderful. Did they invite him in?
No, but there was an inordinate amount of rousting around his neighborhood there for a while. And finally they asked one of the officers that stopped him, "What do we have to do?" And he said, "Find another place to live." So they moved out.
They have a reputation for being hard-nosed.
Well, so do the police. Moving in down the street or across the street from the chief of detectives is not the best idea.
I should think not.
He was very protective toward his neighborhood.
And I assume that they did not hold Tupperware parties there.
No. They didn't act up too much because they didn't want to draw too much heat, but they didn't realize the heat was already on.
How did he find out that they had moved in?
Well, it became obvious when the motorcycles started showing up, and the chief of detectives, he'd been around a long time. He knew most of them, just by appearance. So they weren't fooling anybody.
Now,
so,
have you thought of another episode out of the book that you'd like to share?
Well, there were just all kinds of things going on. I think one of the craziest things that happened was I had to appear in court one day, and despite my long hair, beard, and scruffy appearance, I wore a 3-piece suit, and when I got to the detective bureau, the street enforcement guys informed me that they had in custody a classmate of mine from high school, and they had turned him. He was going to inform to stay out of jail. He was an addict and did not want to go through withdrawal, but he wanted to work with me. And I had been in court. I had to go back to court. The only clothes I had were a suit, a 3-piece business suit. So, and he was adamant he would only work with me. They wanted this dealer. They'd been working him for quite a while. So I said, what the heck? I mean, let's just roll the dice. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'll think of something on the way. So when we got there, the dealer, he was a little taken back by, me being in a business suit, and he wanted to know why, and I told him I was in court. I was there on an assault and battery charge. He wanted to know what I'd been arrested for, because he wanted to make sure that I hadn't been arrested on a drug charge, and that I wasn't working for the police and going to give him up. So in the course of all this, the guy had a couple of goats tied up in his front yard, and they were eating the weeds down. I mean, rather than mow the lawn, he had goats, which is not illegal within the city limits of San Jose. So I just took one of the goats and walked him in like a dog. And sat down on the sofa, gave my story. He wanted me to use the dope there, and I told him I couldn't, that I had to go back to court. And I couldn't go to court, displaying the symptoms of being under the influence of heroin. And he insisted then that I should come back after court. And I told him, I'll be in full withdrawal. You want me there, walking in, you want me walking in here with snot running out of my nose and retching, and it'll be obvious that I'm in full withdrawal and that I'm trying to get well coming here and just lead the bulls here. Well, he wasn't convinced, and in the course of our conversation, he wanted some more assurance that I was actually an addict. The goat bit the corner off of one of the cushions on his sofa and started pulling the stuffing out and eating it. Well, apparently his wife had just bought this sofa, and he got all shook up, and I said, well, it's not even my goat, it's your goat. I was just visiting with him, I grew up on a farm, I like goats. And so I handed him the money, and he wouldn't take it, so I set it on the table, and I wanted the dope, which he was holding, and then the goat picked up the money and started to eat it. So he grabbed the money from the goat. I took the drugs from him, and I said, look, it's been a pleasure doing business with you, thanks. And as I walked out, as soon as I walked out, the street enforcement team hit the place. They had the SWAT team with them, and they seized a couple of ounces of heroin, all the weighing and packaging materials, and everything set up for a sales operation. And I went back to court. I wanted to keep the goat, but they wouldn't let me.
Well, I would have thought that one of his areas of defense would be that he bought the stuff from the goat.
Well, that might have worked. We never went. I never went to court on it. He obviously pled out. He might have been on parole also. There may not even have been a trial. If he had enough left on his sentence, they may have just sent him back for to finish out his sentence. That happens a lot.
I remark almost every time you're on, but when we were working on this book together, I kept asking you, how in the world did you ever get out of this thing alive? And to this day, it still is unfathomable to me that you were able to escape so many hairy situations. And if it were anybody else, it would be almost unbelievable. But coming from you, I know there's not a stretch word in this. Every account contained in Deep Cover Cop is 100% true.
Well, I had a knack for getting myself into tight spots. I'm sure that the things that happened were not what they had envisioned when they, assigned me that deep cover position. It's just, these things happen. It's a crazy world. The drug culture is, it's volatile to say the least. And paranoia runs rampant through that culture. And all that you can do is try to flow along with it.
Is your son involved in the same kind of thing? Is he undercover at all?
No, he did work Metro, which is the sting operations, and then he was on the SWAT team, which again he enjoyed that like I did. I mean, that was the best job I ever had was being on the SWAT team. That's just a young man's dream. Now he's assigned in Austin. Lake Austin runs through the middle of town, and as you go west of town, there is one mansion after another, literally millions and millions and millions of dollars there. And I don't know where all that money comes from. Oil, I guess, high tech, land, but they want that. Front, the river, the lakefront patrolled. So there's always 4 officers on the lake, making sure that the people aren't getting drunk and crashing their boats and getting killed, and just generally obeying the maritime laws of the lake. So that's a pretty cushy job for him now, but after 18 years in law enforcement, I guess he deserves it.
Yes, indeed. Good man. Your guest is late. I'm wondering if he has lost the information on how to get on.
I sent it to him, but I will check it and see where he has gone.
While you're checking that, I'm going to remind the audience that those who are listening, we're going to give away a copy of Deep Cover Cop but in order to get a free copy, which is a $25 hardcover book, it's you're going to have to call in. Now, if you're listening on your phone, all you have to do to call in and be on the show is dial 5. And that will put you in line. We'll take the call in the order in which we receive it. And if you are listening on your computer, you will need to grab a phone. If it's a hard line, that is, if it's wired to your wall, you need to dial 1 first. But if it's a cell phone, you just dial the rest of the number, which is 701-801-0829. Again, 701-801-0829, and we'll bring you on. We have a caller from the 830 area, prefix 708. Caller, your first name.
Russell.
Are you Ted's guest?
I hope so.
We appreciate your
Otherwise,
call.
they're mad at me. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, what we wanted to talk about, Russ and I both worked for San Jose PD. When I first came on, he was a training officer on the midnight training team I was assigned to. And then later we were in narcotics together. When we left there, I went to the SWAT team. Russ went to the Federal Narcotic Task Force. And that's where he met some people and wound up doing some work in Central America during the Iran-Contra affair. So he's got a wealth of experience here. But specifically what I wanted to talk to him about was the mess that San Jose got itself into with their problems with their pension fund for the officers. Now, I remember when I first started, we had just merged our pension fund with the fire department. And the fire department proceeded to retire out all their dead wood and clean it out so that nobody could retire for about 5 years after that. But what's your take on what has happened there, Russ? Because you've got a good idea about this.
Well, yeah, I think it's a lot simpler than the politicians want to make it out to be. But basically what was occurring in the 1960s and the 1970s in California was that the police officers union, the fire department union, and this is the same all across the nation. They're big unions. They have a lot of money, and they would donate to politicians. Those politicians, those city council members, etc., they get elected, and then they sit down with the fire department and the police department and decide what the retirement packages are going to be. So, you've got two hands that are shaking each other and patting each other on the back. The type of plans we did back then were what you call defined benefit. In other words, this is what we're going to pay you when we retire. Now, the city officials who came up with those plans, they could care less. They were kicking the can down the road. They said, we don't have the money today to pay that retirement money. We're not going to set the proper money aside, but we'll worry about it 10, 15 years, 20 years down the road when everybody starts retiring. If they would use a defined benefit plan, that would have meant Ted and I would have been paid X amount every month, and the city would have put X amount into a 401 type plan. I would have put so much in a 401 plan. And when I retired, the city would have been done with me. But that's not what they did. And so the politicians, it looked good on paper at the time, but what happens is people start retiring, the city hadn't planned for it, you have a whole new set of city managers running the department, running the city, and they're out of money. And the city of San Jose's out of money. You can name cities across this nation that are going bankrupt because of retirement package plans that they agreed 2 years ago.
And then they spent the money that was supposed to go into the fund.
Sounds
sure,
like
they were
Social
spent. Yeah,
Security.
they didn't have the time. They didn't have to set the money aside, so they spent it for other issues. But like what happened here in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, the old phrase, the chickens came home to roost. You had a lot of people retiring. None of that money was set aside. So then the city had to start raising taxes. You start raising taxes, you run into a whole host of problems with the voters. And I think it's as simple as that. I don't think any city, state, or federal employee should have any other type of retirement plan except a 401, whatever the city can afford at the time to put in your retirement. 401 type investment program should be the way it's done. Would have eliminated all these problems they have today.
Well, in 8 days from today, on the 14th of October, a notice that came through the email to me indicates that on that date, the Securities and Exchange Commission will issue a ruling that the only retirement funds that will be recognized will be investments in treasury bonds and treasury bills, which, as you may or may not be aware, pay next to nothing. And yet that ruling will be issued from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and there are two companies that currently have $5 trillion in assets for retirement programs that have already sent out notices to their retirees that this is the case. Not only that, but under the ruling, they can refuse any withdrawals from the funds and issue fees as well. In effect, what they're talking about is taking all of the retirement plans, no matter what they are, whether they're real estate related or precious metals or anything, and say that the only legal retirement accounts anymore will be in U.S. government treasuries, which in effect gives the government of the United States the right to rip off everybody's retirement and give debt instruments in exchange. How's that grab you?
Well, yeah, that's just stuff. Just ticks me off to no end. Let's start first with the whole concept of freedom. You cannot have freedom unless you're free to fail. And I can't stand it that someone tells me how I must save for retirement. I should be able to invest in a self-directed IRA or a self-directed 401. If I want to invest in gold, I should be able to. It's my money. If I want to invest in the health industry, I should be able to. If I want to invest, and if I fail, if I make bad investment decisions, that's my fault. That's what freedom is all about. The freedom to succeed. You have no freedom if you're being saved from failure. And this telling me how to. Luckily, I'm at the age now where it doesn't matter to me. But to the younger generations, I just feel sorry for them, because you're exactly right. The government wants control of your money, and the more rules and regulations they put on it, the more control they have over you.
Well, I warned my audience that on the 30th of September, the International Monetary Fund was going to issue a brand new currency, and they did. It's called special drawing rights, based on a basket of currency, and the big player now is China, because China's renminbi is backed by gold. Well, but of course the U.S. dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the government of the United States, and we know how much faith there is in that, and how much.
$20 trillion in debt. That's what it's backed by.
Yeah, but it's going to be a lot more, because I don't know what the retirement funds add up to, but I'll bet it's at least 20 trillion. Because
that's why they'd like to get their hands on it.
Exactly. It's the only way they see of actually paying off the debt. And it means that people who are retiring will get promissory notes. Try buying milk and bread with that.
It worked pretty good in Germany and for a while in the 1930s.
Yeah, but
how's it working? How's it working in Venezuela right today? Not too well.
They only have a riot every other day, I think, now.
Well, you don't know what lawlessness is until you see hungry people. When they can't get enough to eat and enough to feed their families, then you're going to see some lawlessness.
Yeah, but we all know how the law treats people. We just watch Hillary and we realize there is no law.
Well, do you remember the naivete of Marie Antoinette when they told her the people had no bread?
Yeah, just let them
she
drink.
Just assumed everybody was as well heeled as she was. She said, well, but let them eat cake. I mean, Hillary's about that in tune with what's really going on.
Yeah, I think Hillary's version is let them drink champagne.
No, or Kool-Aid.
Yeah. And we all know how that turned out.
But a self-directed 401 or IRA, and all of this could have been averted.
Yes, sure, because I would be drawing a pension fund, or all the guys we worked with who are retired now would draw on a pension fund based on, and they'd have no contact with the city anymore. They'd be done. The city would have no liability to them, and it would be them. It would be like people who worked for large corporations in the past. They retired with their 401ks or their self-directed or their IRAs, whether they were self-directed or not. But yeah, the city's got itself in a mess, and I'm not paying real close attention now. I know they've passed Measure F, and I'm not even sure what all that means.
Yeah, but, they've lost over 630 officers since 2011.
Yeah,
that takes them down to just over 800 officers. That is minimum staffing for a city that size. And they got a very, very dangerous. They played fast and loose with public safety there, and they got a dangerous situation.
And we're talking the city of San Jose, but this is played over and over and over to cities all across the nation.
Sure. Well, but think, gentlemen, of the wonderful example that was set, because we have the example of Social Security, And we all know that Congress kept dipping into the so-called lockbox and grabbing fistfuls of the money that was supposed to be there in Social Security, and they spent it on their own pork barrel projects so that there was nothing left.
Exactly the same type of problem. Which goes back to my argument too. It just drives me. Social Security drove me nuts. I went out on my way to avoid it through my whole adult life, not paying into it. But again, it's the government telling me how I must spend my retirement money, how I must invest it. And again, it's to protect me. And the welfare of the citizenry is always the excuse of the tyrant. And our politicians are always concerned. They say they're trying to protect us, but no, they're just tyrants. They're just they want the control.
They don't want to be leaders. They want to be rulers. And they've got a mess. And the state of California with CalPERS is in the same kind of mess. And San Jose, I mean, I don't see how they can take and hire and train up officers to fill the vacancies. They'll have to try to hire officers away from other agencies. I just don't see that they can.
And won't that actually ultimately be more expensive? Because they're going to have to beat other cities' wages.
Well, yes, they'll have to do that. It used to be that San Jose, was a large, prestigious department with an excellent national reputation, and it was quite simple to entice officers from other departments. Most of the departments were paid less, so they got a pay raise coming to San Jose anyway. So that wasn't a problem. But now those people have left. These other departments have provided incentives to keep them. It'll be difficult. On the other hand, hiring people with no experience and then putting them through the hiring process, then the training process. By the time you take a class of 30 recruits, when they're finished up and ready to go out on their own, you've got maybe 10 or 15 left. Whereas if you hire an experienced officer who has a proven record of performance, you don't have to worry about losing him in that training process. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to each, but they've got a real problem, and they've got to get it solved. So they're saying Measure F ratifies the settlement San Jose negotiated with its unions last year over Measure B, former Mayor Chuck Reed's ambitious pension reform measure that 69% of the voters approved in 2012. Well, they voted it for themselves. He sold them on it, and the voters voted for it. And now they're screaming because they've got a crime wave and a big mess going on.
Well, I was just thinking about this, and when you hired on, Ted, Vietnam War was winding down, and young battle-hardened kids were coming back from in-country and signing up to become officers. In your case, you looked like you were about 16, but you were 25 and a second-degree black belt, so they could use you undercover. They don't have that army of ex-military men coming back right now, do they?
Well, my understanding is that they've got a lot more members of the Reserve and Guard on the department now who either go active for part of the year, or some of them take a leave and will go active for a year or two at a time. But see, without the conscription, without the draft, you don't have all those people going through the military, getting some sort of military training, some sort of discipline, and then coming out, and a lot of them were good prospects to become police officers. Like I always said, I think the draft is horrible for the military. It destroys the prestige of the military, and yet it's great for society because all these people who would otherwise never get any discipline get a couple years of getting brought in line, learning some respect and some discipline. I mean, Russ, wouldn't you agree that the professional army that we have today is a better trained, more efficient army than what we had when we had a large conscripted army?
Yeah, yeah. I was the job I had when I was a helicopter pilot in the Army during the Vietnam era. So you would think I saw a lot of elbow to elbow contact with most of the troops, but actually I really didn't. So it's hard for me to compare. I mean, I on paper I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense to me. I think today we have plenty of guys who have been in the military who would go into law enforcement. We've got a different issue today, though. Why would you go into law? Yeah, you know, people read the internet, they read the news. Why would you go into law enforcement today when you have all this political, what's the word I want to use, against the police officers? I mean, I just don't understand why you'd even want to be a police officer with the political crap that's going on.
You don't like being a target?
Well, I don't like being a political target. I think every police officer knows that there's a risk. You know, there's a job you have to do, and there's a risk, and that's part of the excitement and everything. But hey, this political stuff is you know, when you don't get the backing of your own government, that's demoralizing, man, and that would be what would keep me out of the job today.
Well, and it's even more than just not getting the backing of your government. When your government holds you up as the scapegoat for the shortcomings of them and society in general.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. You just don't. I think you know, I don't actually. Police work is safer today than it was in the 70s. During the 70s was one of the highest death rates since the Al Capone era. You know, we had a huge police work was very dangerous during the Al Capone era. Then it dropped off. Then police deaths started to really gain again in the 70s, and a lot of that had to do with the war on drugs. It's come down a little bit, but I don't think the danger of the job is a detriment to guys who want to go into the work. That's why they want to go into the work. But this political back and forth, like Ted says, hanging the cops out to dry, not backing them politically, that's what will keep you from becoming a cop. Or
well, and a lot of it's being done for shameless political gain, which is what just that's infuriating to watch how that's done. You know, our own Justice Department and the President, without law and order, and let's face it, the police are our first line of defense and our last line of defense. Without law and order, society breaks down, and you've got chaos. And then you've got, like, what's occurring in Venezuela now.
And it's going to get worse. Gentlemen, I need to take a short commercial pause. We'll be right back. And by the way, to those of you who are listening in order to talk online, if you're listening on your phone, all you have to do is dial 5. And remember, we're going to award a hardcover copy of Deep Cover Cop to somebody who calls in. And if you are listening on your computer, just grab a phone and dial 701-801-0829. 701-801-0829. We will be right back. Omni-Hypnosis Training Center has long been known as the leader in hypnosis certification training. They offer the most complete and organized course in hypnosis available anywhere. And this extensive course includes lecture, demonstration, experimentation, audio-visual aids, hands-on practice, plus extensive question and answer sessions. And this extensive training session is from September 29th through October 5th at Energy Development at 215 South Mountainland Drive, Orem, Utah. Now, for a limited time, you can achieve certification and save $100 in the process. Now, there are only a few openings left. To be included, call Kayla Tomlinson, 801-259-7024. Kayla will get you registered and make sure you receive the $100 savings. But hurry, because these openings are very limited. Call Kayla at 801-259-7024. That's 801-259-7024. When I'm asked what's the best precious metal to buy, my answer is always the same. Ask yourself, how do I get change? Predictions are that when the collapse of paper money comes, a 1-ounce silver round may jump in value to $500 or $600. Gold's going to be much higher. Well, how do you get change? As the national marketing rep for Phoenix Certified Mint, I recommend that you get the smallest units possible. Just call 801-706-2256. That's 801-706-2256. Leave your name and phone number twice and the best time to call. I'll get back to you. Or you can call tonight after 7 p.m. or before 3:30 tomorrow. Now, remember, nobody knows for sure when the collapse will happen, but more and more financial wizards are pointing toward the 1st of October or the election. So don't hesitate to call me. I'll answer any questions you've got. No obligation, of course. Call 801-706-2256. That's 801-706-2256. You are listening to Drive Time Live, the Mills Crenshaw Show on talkradio1.us. And the rest of the story is, if you listen on your phone and you can hear the show on your phone, all you have to do is dial 5 and that will bring you up for a conversation. We will invite you on board, and you may win the hardcover copy, which will be shipped directly to you. My guest host today is Ted Sumner. Ted, will you introduce Russ, please?
Russ is an old friend. We worked together at the San Jose Police Department. Russ was a training officer on the team that I trained on when I was first hired, and then we worked together in narcotics. I was doing the deep undercover operation. Russ worked major violators. A number of times my cases got too big for me and I had to pass them off to him. Russ is also a combat helicopter pilot where he served in Vietnam. He was wounded and came back and joined the police department. He's written a book called Honorable Intentions that covers not only what he did in Vietnam, but the feelings of futility based on what we were asking our soldiers to do in the face of our national policy. And then that carries over into how we all came to feel about the war on drugs and where we were getting with that. We were risking our lives in many cases, and for what? Something that could be solved much more efficaciously through legalization, taxation, and regulation. Russ, you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Did I leave anything out?
Well, I worked in, you briefly mentioned it earlier. I was recruited to work for the State Department down in Costa Rica and Nicaragua during the Iran-Contra, and I was involved in that. I worked in the Soviet Union.
Were you CIA at the time?
No, I was State Department.
Oh.
Hired and paid for the State Department, and but I ran around with all kinds of CIA guys down there. Bill Hull, Cronin, a bunch of names that if you're familiar with the Iran-Contra affair, you would recognize that they were involved on the Costa Rica side of things.
Russ also speaks fluent Spanish, so he was quite at home in Central America there. And then later you had to testify.
During Iran-Contra, during Iran-Contra I testified off, nothing that was ever televised. Because what I uncovered and what I basically was looking for was my job is to find the source of the small arms trafficking that was going on. Basically, you had one department of our government, the State Department, investigating another department, the CIA, because you had that secret, what they call it, the basement at the White House that was running the CIA operation in Costa Rica. And State Department wanted to know where those guns were coming from. And it turned out to be a operation called Tip Kettle that Oliver North was running, and those small arms that were coming into the country were coming from Israel. Well, nobody wanted that public. Nobody wanted, on either side, Democrats or Republicans, wanted that information public. So that's why none of my testimony was ever publicized. It is now. I mean, it's not just in my book. You can find other references to it. The Israeli connection during Iran-Contra.
Well, and then while you were doing those investigations, you kept running across how the drug operations were being conducted, and you were right in the middle of that. The State Department wasn't interested in that information.
Oh no, they shut me down. Yeah, they shut me down. They said we're not interested in that. If you see drugs and stuff like that, just mind your own business. That's not your job. They shut me down. And it was the stuff that broke. What was it called? Dark Alliance. The book that was written in the newspaper articles, the CIA involvement in the drug running from Central America in order to raise money to fund the Contras.
I denied that for years out of ignorance, and I was absolutely convinced that our government could not possibly be involved in drug running. And clearly I was being naive to the extreme. And I just wonder how it is that our government became so corrupt.
Let me give you a story, true story. Back in World War I, an officer by the name of William Donovan, he was called Wild Bill. He earned the medal. He won the Medal of Honor in World War I. Well, in World War II, he was the head of the OSS, which became the CIA.
Very familiar with him.
When World War II was over, Donovan testified how our government cooperated with the mafia in Italy because the mafia was fighting fascism. Well, the mafia was funding their activities through narcotics from Europe into the United States. So, and some people say, well, yeah, but that, okay, we were cooperating, we were working with the mafia, and yeah, they were running drugs, and we knew it, and we allowed it to happen. But, that was the good war, they said. That was fighting Nazism and fascism. And that's technically, though, what was happening in Central America. There were, as far as I know, my experience, there was no direct involvement by the CIA or the State Department or any of the other agencies in Central America. They were not directly involved in drugs. They just knew it was happening, and they were looking the other way. And that's the same thing that was happening during World War II. Right or wrong, I don't know. Was one war more important than the other? I don't know. All I'm saying is that this is the reality. This is what was happening in World War II. This is what was happening during Iran-Contra. And I don't know. I have a problem with it. Um, Ted, I think Ted agrees with me somewhat on where I'm coming from today. But with my experience, I think the war on drugs is a failed policy, and that we have no business trying to prohibit drugs any more than we try to restrict alcohol. I don't want people using drugs. I'd rather they don't use drugs. But if they are going to use drugs, I wish they would use a pharmaceutical grade, known quality, known quantity. And the only way to do that is to regulate it. Take it away from the drug dealers. Get rid of the drug cartels the same way we got rid of the Al Capones.
Well,
And we would have never had. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Prohibition made Al Capone. Prohibition
Exactly.
made the whole thing extra profitable.
Alcohol didn't. Alcohol didn't create the problems. Prohibition did. Alcohol didn't create the Al Capones and the Meyer Lansky's. Prohibition did. Drug prohibition has created all the drug cartels, not drugs. Drugs didn't do it. We didn't have. I was working law enforcement before the war on drugs began, so I know what the drug problem was in the United States in '68, '69, and '70. But when the ball got rolling, when Nixon became president and he started the war on drugs, that's when the crackdown began. And that's when, in order to get around the rules and the laws, people started making methamphetamine instead of amphetamines. Crack cocaine came along. Those are all byproducts of the war on drugs. If we hadn't had the war on drugs, we would have never had crack. We wouldn't have methamphetamine. No, people would be taking pills. People would be the more milder form. People prefer the milder form of every drug, no matter what it is, if it's legal. Look at alcohol. What do most people drink? Most people drink beer and wine, and when they drink alcohol, hard liquor, how do most people drink it? It's in a mixed drink. It's watered down. There are people who drink straight shots, but the majority drink it in its milder form. The majority in Bolivia, where cocaine is legal to the local population, they don't smoke crack, they don't snort powder cocaine, they chew on cocoa leaves. They prefer it in the milder form. And so what we've created with this war on drugs is just an absolute disaster, destroying young people's lives, throwing them in prison. They get out of prison. They have to join a gang while they're in prison to survive. So then they get out of prison for a nonviolent drug offense. They have a drug record. They can't get a job, so they join the gangs on the outside, and we've just got a nightmare. And it's going to take more than a generation to clean up after we change our drug law.
Going back into the Jurassic era, when Ted first got involved, here was this curly-headed, pink-cheeked kid who looked about 17. If you were his training officer or were involved in his training, just looking at Ted at that period of time, did you think he had the makings of a police officer?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I never personally trained him. I don't think we ever rode in a car with me as an FTO and him as a trainee. And actually, I never really was conscious of Ted until I'm up in narcotics and I'm told that we've got 2 police officers who are now in narcotics. You're not going to meet them, but they are working. They've gone back to school as high school students. And at the time, I thought, man, that's cool. That's pretty good. And I don't know how much Ted has told you about this, but he and another officer were hanging around high schools. They're enrolled in one. They're buying dope from the kids who are bringing the dope. The 18-year-olds who were bringing into the 16 and 17-year-olds in the high school. They're meeting those connections, but pretty soon they're buying from the teachers. And, at first, I was naive back then. I thought this was a pretty good program. Well, it turned out to be an absolute nightmare when the arrests started coming down. I mean, we had, wasn't it Del Mar High School, Ted? The kids just absolutely rioted. You got officers infiltrated high school. It was a disaster. Then he said, well, we're not going to do that again. Blackford High School, Del Mar High School, what was the other, Prospect High School. It turned out to be a bondugal. And they arrested a few guys who were selling to 16 and 17-year-old kids in the high school. And they even got a teacher or two. But, in the long run, it was a disaster. They didn't do that anymore. And then because they were already in narco, then they brought Ted and Charles into the normal unit, and that's when Ted and I started working together and bouncing cases off him. Ted was the one who the case was starting to get too big. Ted turned over me a gal by the name of Sherry James, and Ted knew where it was leading, but because of the unit he worked with in narco, he couldn't continue it. He turned her over to me, and that's what led me to eventually infiltrate. I was the first police officer ever to infiltrate and ride with the Hells Angels. So, Ted was the catalyst for that case. It was one of the biggest cases I ever had. It ended up, we arrested 33 members of the Hells Angels, including Sonny Barger. Big RICO trial. It was a big case. And it all started because just a poo-butt drug street corner type buy.
Well, I worked with Ted on his book, Deep Cover Cop, and I kept asking him,
Yep.
how in the world did you ever get out of this alive?
Yeah, you don't think about it at the time. It's like when I flew helicopters in Vietnam. I was a scout pilot, so you're out there alone, you're low level, you got some cover up high with machine guns and stuff, but when the shit hits the fan, it takes them a while to come in and get you bailed out. So, and at the time I didn't realize how dangerous it was. You just don't.
I've seen photographs of your ship after you got back and counted the bullet holes. That's dangerous.
And you think, but you think, you're young, you're naive. That's why young people go to war and old people don't. You're young and naive, and you think you can do it. I'm riding around out there riding around with groups like the Hells Angels or the New Extra Familia. I infiltrated them too, and that was more dangerous. Those guys would have killed me in a minute if they suspected I was a cop.
Oh yeah.
But you just don't. You don't think it's going to happen to you, and the reason you're good at it is because you have that sense, that sixth sense when something's going haywire.
At that time, were you buff and you had long hair?
Oh yeah, Ted, you need to get him a picture of me and my Hells Angels. I had real long hair, full beard. Now I wasn't a big kid. I may have been about Ted's height, but I didn't have his bulk or strength. I was actually kind of skinny and thin. I looked like a doper. And I was nondescript, and that's what you need to be a good undercover cop, to do the type of things I was doing, where you're undercover for months and months and months, a year at a time. You need to be very nondescript. You don't stand out. Most cops have trouble working narcotics. Within a narcotics unit, you've only got a few guys who work undercover. All the rest of the guys are doing the backup and the surveillance stuff.
Support work.
Support work. The true guys that are working undercover like Ted and I did, there's very few cops can do that, because most cops have been, number one, by the time you get to a bureau, you've got 5 or 6, maybe even 10 years under your belt. So even when you're off duty, you walk like a cop, you talk like a cop, you chew gum like a cop, and you get spotted. You walk into a room, and you can try to grow a beard and long hair, but you walk into a room and everybody goes, cops are here. So it's hard to explain, but there's a few guys who don't have that when they walk and talk. They've got that. They just fit in real good. So and Ted and I had that. We had that ability to blend in, and he was part of it. What worked real well from Ted was that he was just very young looking, and nobody ever thought. He looked like a kid. He didn't look like he was old enough to be a cop.
Even when I was in uniform, they thought I was a cadet or something.
Well,
we had another guy. We had another guy that worked with Ted and me. His name was D. Avila, and he was a Mexican. Even in a uniform, driving a car, someone would call and say, "I think some Mexicans stole a patrol car." They can't be a cop. And he was very good at what he did. I think he bounced from unit to unit, working undercover assignments, because he was just so good at it.
Well, you have to live by your wits, and being deep cover, you can't carry a wire or anything like that. You can't call for help.
They do today. They don't do what Ted and I did back then. They don't do today.
No.
You're always wired. You've always got guys covering you. Actually, I walked in and did $60,000 deals for cocaine with a briefcase of $60,000. Well, number one, that is really stupid. Because it's not that they think you're a cop. They just think you're some dummy with $60,000 and they're going to take it. They're going to rip you off. And of course, they're worried that you think there's just some dummy with $60,000 in cash and you're going to rip them off. So, but they don't work that way anymore. It's too dangerous and too time consuming. They don't do the stuff that Ted and I did anymore.
Well, and they kind of lost the will when Joe McNamara was chief. He just didn't want to commit to that as former chiefs had. And he was pretty much of the same attitude that the war on drugs was a failure.
Yeah, Chief McNamara and I worked together for many years up until his death recently, and I was out to California a lot with him. He was at the Stanford University at the Hoover Institute, but yeah, he had the same opinion. He couldn't express it, but he helped me a lot with my master's program and my later PhD. Academically, he helped me, kind of steered me and led me along the way. Publicly, he couldn't say anything, but he believes the same way that I believe today, and I think Ted does too, that the war on drugs was an absolute failure. It's doing more damage to society than if we just legalized and regulated.
Well, and it creates a complete criminal underclass as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
there's a criminal monetary incentive.
He's not the only chief of police, too. I can name off the top of my head. I sometimes have trouble, but numbers of chiefs of police and retired sheriffs and sheriff's deputies and who all believe the same thing. Once they retire, they're able to stand back and look and see the forest for the trees and realize that this is just, Steve Downing, a good friend of mine, deputy chief of police of L.A., retired now, but he's on board. He's working harder than I am to put an end to this war on drugs.
Well, Russ, we've got a book of Ted's exploits, but what is the case that you remember most while you were working undercover?
The case that I remember the most, well, I would have to be the Hells Angels case that started with Ted's arrest of Chuck and Sherry James, and that went to the Hells Angels. And I had more. I admit it, I had more fun in that period of my life than any other time. It was a lot of fun doing it.
Give us an example of what happened there.
Oh God, it's kind of hard because it
Tell them about
spans a long period of time. But
tell them about the gathering you had to go to in Oakland.
Well, yeah, there was going to be a they call them a ride. The Hells Angels were going to have a ride, and so San Jose, everyone from Bernardino, they call it Purdue, from Bernardino in L.A. to Oak. There was a big Hells Angels party up at the Oakland chapter of the Hells Angels, and of course San Jose was going, and I was invited along. At that point, I was called a hanger-oner, and but I was accepted as a hanger-oner. That's the first step before you become a prospect. And and I got as far as, well, anyway, I'm jumping the story here. So, I go into my boss and I say, hey, we're having a ride along and up to all the Hells Angels from all over the nation are showing up in Oakland. And they said, absolutely not. You can't go up there all by yourself. And so Treasury, ATF had a guy that was going to be there. And so it worked out. But, you can't imagine what it's like 10 or 11 o'clock at night to gang up with 20 other bikers, Hells Angels, and you're all 2x2, and you start rumbling down the roads. And, of course, at the head is the president of the San Jose chapter, which at that time was Phil Cross. And then you had Bill Perky and Dirty Doug and all these guys. And then you had
was that Filthy Phil?
Prospect. Filthy Phil, yes. Phil Cross. And you're riding down the street, the rumble, the roar of the bikes. It's just I was becoming a biker. I was becoming one of them. It was just a fantastic. You get up there, and I mean, there's music playing, there's party, there's women, there's food. It wasn't good food, but there's food, pizzas, beer flowing. And that's when after that when they gave me my they gave me my prospect patch, and that was just, I mean, it was just a good time. There was no really police work involved or done. I'm out spending the government's money to drink booze and eat pizza and chase women on the government's dime. It was a lot of fun.
Well, now, they wanted you to take one of our female officers along with you. Explain to them.
Bertotti wanted this gal who was worthless. Brenda was her first name. I'll leave her last name off.
Yeah.
She was new to narco, and they wanted me to take her along as my mama. And I explained to them, you can't do that. If you're a patched Hell's Angel, then your girl is your girl. No one will touch her. But if you're not patched, if you're a prospect or a hanger-oner and you bring someone, that gal is fair game. And she better realize she's fair game. For sexual favors or whatever else they want. And I had a hard time convincing them I cannot bring anyone with me. We cannot do that. They were trying to figure out a way to, how do you protect me in there if something goes wrong?
Couldn't do it.
And
he couldn't do it. It was you and the elements. That's they never fully understood that. That when we were out there alone, that was that.
To me, it was like flying scouts in Vietnam. I was out there by myself. And I loved it. I liked working alone. That's what I was good at. Now you're not necessarily alone because it's a crowd of people, but you're alone.
Well, you're used to covering your own six, but to cover somebody else is another matter.
Yeah. Yeah, the ATF guy was there, but he couldn't have done anything anyway if something would have happened. All he could have been was a witness to my beating. That's all. It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of dangerous incidents. It was like the time when I first started getting into the Hells Angels. Doug Von Tempe was his name, Dirty Doug. He pointed and cocked a gun at me, and I could see the copper jackets in the cylinders. And he said, "I think you're a snitch," which is dangerous because if they think you're a cop, they'll just never deal with you again. But if they think you're a snitch, they'll kill you.
Yep.
And it's just me and him, and Von Tempe sitting there, and I can see him now. He was at Don Coulter's house. Did you ever know who Don Coulter was, Ted?
Yes.
Anyway, I think you bought dope out of his girlfriend, but Coulter and pointed that gun at me, and I tell you, that's where you better think cool and on your feet, and because he was testing me, and it was a shaky couple of moments there.
Well, what happened?
Oh, I told him I just laughed him off, and I said, "Hell, if I was a snitch, this place had been taken down a long time ago." And I got up and got a beer and brought him back a beer, and then we started talking Harley Davidsons because I obviously wrote an old panhead, and we started talking bikes, and that was it. But there's a few moments there. It's like flying helicopters. It's hours and hours of boredom with a few moments of absolute terror thrown in there.
Yeah.
One of those moments where, holy crapola.
Yep.
And some I did not put in the book that I don't even know if Ted's aware of, but when Patty Hearst got kidnapped, the FBI, of course, is involved in that kidnapping, and remember, and then she had already been seen robbing a bank and stuff. Well, the FBI back then didn't have anybody working undercover. And so they came to Bertotti and said, we need someone who could, because we're getting these phone calls every day about spotting a Patty Hearst, we need someone who's undercover who can check these places out. And the reason it never went in my book because it was uneventful and nothing happened, and it's hard to, but had something happen, I'd ride my motorcycle up to some apartment complex, get up, walk to an apartment door, knock on the door, and just pick some name out of the air, say I'm looking for Cassie, and if someone opened the door, I could see who was inside, see if it was anybody who was associated with Patty Hearst or something like that. But I was all over the Bay Area, just riding around my motorcycle, going to these different places where people had called in and said, I think I saw Patty Hearst here, I think I saw her there. And when Patty Hearst was finally found, if you remember what happened, you realize how dangerous that would have been had I encountered them, because that was the big SLA shootout in L.A., which was a nasty shootout in which a bunch of people died.
That was the Sin Q barbecue. They
Singanese Liberation Army. Yeah, Symbionese Liberation Army. It was a hell of a battle. Yeah, I used to, look at the time. Yeah, it was an insignificant little advance, but it could have been. And of course, that's what police work is. It's not so much what you do, but what you might have to do. Most police work is absolutely, from my point of view, most police work is pretty boring. It's taking reports, it's talking to people, but you don't get paid for doing that. You get paid for what you might have to do, and what you might have to do is sometimes get someone hurt, including you. Ted worked the TAC team. I was on the SWAT team during the Angela Davis riots. I was not good at that kind of stuff. I did not like working in those situations where there were a bunch of other cops around. My point of view was, if you're going to get hurt, I'm probably going to get hurt by another cop wielding, swinging a baton or a flashlight. Put me out by myself. Put me around with a bunch of other cops who were swinging clubs and batons and flashlights, throwing tear gas. God dang, I didn't like that at all. Ted loved it. Ted loved the SWAT team. I didn't like that stuff.
Well, Ted's always been a graybeard at heart, I think, and his training in the martial arts made him probably more fearless than was rational. Am I far off, Ted?
Well, in retrospect, no, that's exactly correct. Yeah. Probably shouldn't have done a lot of the things I did do. And like I say, I don't think that that the administration, when they authorized those undercover operations, really had any idea what was going to happen out there. And, neither did we until it happened. And you get out of it the best way you can.
Yeah, they didn't have the war on drugs was just starting. They didn't have narcotics units before that.
No.
No. I mean, they have some. Nothing like what we were doing. They didn't have anyone really working undercover.
Well, and in those days, a lot of the large police departments, it was a narcotics vice. The two units were together. And if they weren't working prostitution, they might work drugs. If they weren't working gambling, they might, might try to buy drugs. So it was an entirely different operation. Narcotics had not become the cash cow that it has become. And when you've got that much money at stake, people are willing to use deadly force to protect their interest. And that's when it becomes dangerous.
Well, I have seen photographs of rooms filled with pallets of $100 bills. That's an incredible amount of money. And it's...
Well, yeah, but it's a drop in the bucket, too. We seized here in San Antonio, it was fairly recently, the equivalent of pallet loads of cocaine. And millions and millions of dollars it was worth. And we seized it, and it does nothing to the price of drugs. The principle of supply, demand, and prices applies to an illegal business just as well as to a legal one. And if you seize several pallets and it does nothing to the local price of drugs on the streets, then there's just that much more drugs available. It's just unacceptable loss to the drug cartels. Our seizures are doing nothing. And then whether you seize money or drugs, it doesn't matter to the drug cartels.
Well, okay.
They got plenty more.
What does a hit of cocaine go for on the streets now? I hate to demonstrate my ignorance, but I would have no idea. Are we talking about?
I wouldn't either. Yeah, I wouldn't either. It was a line back in my day. A line was about $120, and that's why. I'm going to segue here into another way. But back then, a line of cocaine cost about $120, which meant poor people couldn't use cocaine. It was just too expensive. And Richard Pryor used to make jokes about that. You'd say, you talk about how, with his dealer, what kind of write you a check? Well, yeah. for this coke, is it expensive? Well, Ricky Ross was a drug dealer down in L.A., and he came up with how to make powder cocaine into crack cocaine for pennies. Well, crack cocaine, number one, it's not, powder cocaine is water soluble. For $120, you're selling me something that's in powder form, and it will dissolve. I can't touch my hands. It's just very water soluble. It's hard to transfer. It's hard to carry. You got to protect it. But crack cocaine was in a rock form. You chip it off with a razor blade, and you smoked it, and you could chip it off in little $25 increments. And that's why you had that explosion, that crack cocaine explosion in the 80s throughout, all the poor income neighborhoods across Chicago and New York and Baltimore and everything, because you could chunk it off into little $25 chunks. You could sell it to just about anybody. Anybody can afford $25. So the war on drugs again was, created. It created this demand for better ways to transport it. It's kind of like during alcohol prohibition. Guys weren't running barrels of beer from street corner to street corner. No, they were producing hardcore, very powerful, Everclear type crap.
Well, okay.
So, I have no idea what a line of cocaine costs today.
But let's just use what you are aware of. The line maybe at $120. Well, if that were legal, and if it were available at the corner drugstore for 50 cents or $1, that would take all the profit out of it, and it would be controllable. And I don't know that you would actually end up with more people addicted than would otherwise be, because nobody would be pushing it.
Well, right. Nobody's pushing aspirins. Nobody's pushing
cigarettes.
No, they wouldn't. Yeah, nobody's pushing it. Well, cigarettes is a perfect example of what happens when you try to prohibit something through high taxes. You got these self-righteous people who think again, politicians who are looking out for your benefit. They've got taxes on cigarettes so high in some states that you now have a black market in cigarettes. You got people selling what are called onesies. They'll buy a pack and then they'll sell one cigarette at a time at enough price to make a profit. It's because if you get the taxes too high on anything, you'll create a black market for it. I could see if cocaine were legalized today, it would be, number one, it would be prescription from your doctor, and it would probably cost you, I'm going to say, maybe $6, $7, maybe $10 a dose with taxes and everything, which is high enough to keep not expensive enough to create a black market, but enough to raise some tax money that could be used for other things. Addiction prevention. But I could see, when I was in college, we're talking, we're going way back now, 64, 65. I could have a midterm exam Monday morning, and I could go into my doctor on a Friday, and I could say, "Doctor, I got a midterm. I need to study hard this weekend." He'd write me a script for amphetamines. And I'd take some amphetamines, I'd stay up, I'd cram, I'd go to school, and I'd pass my test. And amphetamines, it wasn't until the war on drugs started, when I was a narc, when they started clamping down on doctors for writing scripts for amphetamines. Well, you stop writing scripts for amphetamines, I could no longer go to my doctor to get amphetamines for just routine stuff where I need to be alert and awake. Well, then the black market's going to step in. Well, if the black market's going to step in, it's not going to make amphetamines. It's not going to fool around with the lightweight stuff. It's going to go all the way to the hardcore methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is nothing more than just a stronger, harder-hitting amphetamine. So you've created a market for a much stronger, more powerful product because you've limited me from getting my amphetamines.
And
amphetamines are cheap.
Yeah, why did the industry go from amphetamines to crystal meth? As you say, the actual war on drug created that whole market. Yeah, crystal meth is just methamphetamines, but it's just another name. But yeah, they went to that because if you're going to make the product illegally, you're going to make it in the most powerful form you can. Doesn't matter what it is, whatever the product is. If you're going to make it illegal, if it's an illegal product and you're in the black market, you're going to make it as strong as possible because it's easier to transport and carry, and your profit is higher.
If we went back to alcohol prohibition, the only thing you'd be able to buy would be hardcore Everclear. No one would be making beer and wine.
Sure. And the state wouldn't be making tons of money on taxes.
No. No, and that's a big key. And that's one of the reasons you have so many, and I hate this argument. I don't like to make it because I give talks all over the nation all the time, and I try to steer away from this argument. But the tax argument is a very powerful argument. The reason a lot of states are now legalizing medical marijuana or outright marijuana like Colorado and Washington is for the tax revenue. And I say that's the wrong reason. But if you're going to do it, even if it's the wrong reason, well, do it. Just make sure you don't overtax it, because if you get the taxes too high, then you haven't eliminated the black market.
Absolutely correct. We've got a caller coming in, and we'll bring them up. Caller, hold on just a minute, and we'll bring you up. I need to do a commercial announcement first. And what I want to talk about briefly is the fact that on the 14th and 15th of this month, just about a week away, we're talking about the fact that we're going to have a meeting with all of the presidential candidates. They're all being invited, even from the fringe parties. We believe that the independent-minded voter is going to make the final decision on who's going to be president. If you look at how close the race is, and then look at the undecided or the independent-minded voter, you can quickly see who's going to make that decision. But for us to have that televised gathering on the 15th, we need some donations. And you can send the donations to Mills Crenshaw at 2083 West, 7125 South. And here's the deal. For every $100 you donate to that rally, to the Independent Voters Rally, we will see that you get a 1 gram gold coin called the Caesar Augustus, and this is pure gold, 4 nines fine. It's sealed in a plastic card like a credit card that has an individual serial number, and that address again is 2083 West, 7125 South. And if you're sending a check, make it payable to me, and I will be responsible to see that you get the gold round. So you can donate to the independent-minded voter rally and end up with gold as a result. Let's go to our caller who will be eligible to win the copy of Deep Cover Cop. Caller in the 502 area, prefix 382. Your name, please.
Daryl Pinto.
Daryl, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Yeah, this is the first time I've been listening to your radio station. I'm a student of Ted Sumner. Been with him for about 28 years. 5th degree black belt in Tracy Campbell. And
you are a 5th degree?
5th degree, yes.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Newly promoted at the last man standing, by the way.
Outstanding. Well, Ted's a great man.
Oh yeah, a great instructor, great vessel of knowledge. But I was listening to all the drugs on the problems with the war on drugs, and serving a couple of tours over in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then coming back here and living in Germany, where the police actually respect it. It's just insane how anyone would want to be a police officer here and get the kind of treatment they get in America.
Let me give you a background on Daryl there, Mills. He was a Green Beret. He's a registered nurse and was a combat medic. He was in Afghanistan before the Army was there, calling in airstrikes, and then he, when his unit came back to the United States, he stayed in Germany at Lonsdal at the hospital and worked there, the military hospital. Then went back to Iraq, and then didn't come home for almost 15 years. Finally, they closed the hospital, and he retired out of the military. But he's seen a lot of action. And living in Germany all that time, he got to see a little bit differently. I remember in reading Tommy Frank's book about when he was stationed in Germany, and they had a problem with some soldiers living off base who were into drugs, and the MPs went over there, and they decided to resist. So the MPs called the German police. Tommy Franks was the commander. He said, "Why are you calling the German police?" And they said, "Just watch." And the German police did not have any compunction against roughing up a bunch of American GIs who decided to resist. They operate a little bit differently there than we do here.
Well, Daryl, congratulations and thank you for that service.
You're welcome.
Just so you'll know, I had the good fortune of going to BYU when Ed Parker was there. And so
Okay.
I was personally trained by Parker. And
Wow.
that was a very great privilege. I helped him write a book called Inside Elvis. He lived at my home in California for 30 days while we put that book together. And so he was the brother I never had. Both he and Ted, I view through those same eyes. They were the two brothers that I never had.
Mills, Russ is going to have to sign off. I want to thank him for his participation and the enlightenment he was able to give us about things that were going on in Central America, and his work with narcotics with the San Jose PD. And thank you, Russ, for coming on and lending us your experience and insight.
Thank you.
And let me know, next time you'd like to have me on, just let me know. It's been a lot of fun, but I've got matters I got to take care of here at home. So thanks again, guys, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Russ. We're very grateful to have had
bet.
you. Thank you. Okay, let's see. We still have 502-382 prefix. Is that you, Darrell or Daryl? What happened? He disappeared.
I don't know.
Do you see Daryl on a regular basis?
No, we talk on a regular basis, but no, he lives up in Kentucky now. He's going to Kentucky State University, getting his master's degree in nursing, and then I saw him at the Last Man Standing in Dallas a couple of weeks ago, and that was when Al Tracy and I promoted him to his 5th degree.
The reason I asked the question, Ted, was he left before I could get information on how to send him a copy of the book. Can we award him a book, and next time you talk to him, have you get the information and ship it to him?
Oh yeah, no problem at all.
I appreciate that. Because
I can take care of that.
That would be great. And I still have a copy here in my hot little hand, so we'll make that available to another caller who wants to call in. And again, all you have to do once you hear us on your telephone is dial 5, and that will bring you up for the conversation. I think these seminars that you attend are a great opportunity to meet people and get acquainted and have them become part of this audience. I'd love I hope there's some more students out there listening to us at this point, whether it's on their computer or on their phone. But if it's on the phone, dial 5 because we want to talk with you. I think that's an important aspect. Ted, are there other experiences that we did not get in the book that you'd like to share?
Oh, there's all kinds of things. I mean, Russ brought up some things that I forgot, and when he was in the process of writing his book, we had lunch a couple of times, and he kept pulling out his notebook and writing things down, and what are you doing? He says, you just reminded me of something I want to put in my book. So, then I had forgotten about Sherry James, but it is in my book, the buy I made from her and her husband, Charlie James, which springboarded him into the Hells Angels. That was an investigation that I was only too happy to relinquish.
Yeah.
I had no desire to try to penetrate that organization.
Well, you had a personal run-in.
Yeah. I mean, I bought dope from them, and I trafficked with them, but I did not want to run with them the way he did.
That would be pretty scary. Refresh everybody's memory about the time you took on the president of the chapter.
Well, that was just I was in patrol. I was working with a training officer. We responded to a disturbance at a bar where we knew the Hells Angels frequented. This was a Friday night, and there was I don't know if you remember Shakey's Pizza. There was a Shakey's Pizza at the other end of the parking lot. And that was a family pizza parlor. They had the old organ and they played music and all kinds of things. So when we got there, the first thing that we found was a trail of blood. Somebody indicated that somebody had been stabbed and that he'd crawled off in that direction. Well, my training officer then proceeded to get the names and statements of witnesses while I followed the trail of blood. And I found the individual inside Shakey's, all these horrified families covering the eyes of their kids as this guy lay there bleeding from his stomach, from his guts where he was knifed. And then I proceeded to administer first aid, called for an ambulance, got his driver's license and figured out who he was. And then I went back over to the bar where my training officer was talking to a couple of individuals, and he told me that they were witnesses and wanted me to get a statement. So as I proceeded to take the man's statement, in those days, what I carried was a metal clipboard that you could carry reports in, and you could just flip one out, and you had a hard surface, so you could write on the 3 copies. And then I had a large steel flashlight called a Kell light. It was a 5-cell flashlight that I just would put under my left arm to light it up so I could see and write. Well, while I was doing this, somebody walked up behind me, kind of to my right, and he stood there for a moment with his arms crossed, and then proceeded to punch the witness straight into the mouth. It broke a bunch of his teeth. And I dropped the clipboard, changed hands with my flashlight as he drew back and drew his hands up into a boxer's position. So my first strike came down on his left hand, which was the closest to me, and that broke the knuckle and the 2 bones and the pinky and the ring finger. And then I just continued the motion, brought it around, and caught the wrist. And I had sufficient acceleration to break the wrist. And then I came down hard on the vagus nerve on the side of the neck, and he dropped to his knees. I cuffed him, and then noticed that the bar was emptying out. We had close to 60 guys coming out. They were going to try to take him away from us. So my training officer indicated to get him into the car and get out of here. We were fighting a retreating action when I heard the engines of three large hammerhead Plymouths from across the street in the shadows fired up, and it was the SWAT team. They were there, four of them in each car, and they'd been watching. And and knowing that eventually this was going to blow up, they came roaring across the street, jumped out with Boken sticks, and just began. It was methodical mayhem, is what it was. I mean, they were like a Spartan phalanx the way they just cut through that mob.
For the uninitiated, a boken is a solid oak or rosewood miniature version of a sword for training and practice purposes, and it makes a powerful baton. It has it's not exactly sharp, but a tapered edge, so that all of the force when it's swung is concentrated in a very narrow area, and it will break bones and cripple nerve endings. Very powerful weapon. And it's impressive that the SWAT team used Bokens.
Well, for crowd control, it was very, very effective. Meanwhile, we proceeded to the hospital where my training officer turned to one of the other officers that was there and said, the kid just took on his first rat, meaning a rat being a term for a member of a motorcycle club. And he says, oh yeah? He says, yeah, he took on the Prez. And it turned out that was Phil Cross, who had come out and hit my witness, and who I subsequently arrested.
Yeah, and that's quite a feather, particularly for a curly-headed, pink-cheeked kid who looked like he was about 17 at the time.
Well, I tell you, after you've stood, in a match and looked across your, flimsy little padded gloves we use in the martial arts, and you look into the eyes of Joe Louis, Chuck Norris, Filthy Phil just didn't look so tough.
And he found out he wasn't.
Well, that happens.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? But the real tough guys, and I mean lethally tough guys, are usually pretty nice people.
Yeah, they're violence is a means to an end for them, and they are the type of people who will accomplish that ends regardless. They don't hold back, and unless there's something to motivate them, they just don't. They don't run around being tough guys. They don't play at being a tough guy. It's like when the deposed king of Sparta was a guest of the king of Persia, Xerxes, before the Battle of Thermopylae. He asked him. He said, "Will they, just 300 Spartans? Will they actually stand there and fight against an army the size of mine?" And he said, "Well, yeah, they will."
And they did.
He said they are men who would prefer not to fight, but when it comes to fighting, they're the best in the world at it. And you're about to take on the finest army on earth and the best men in that army. So,
and you're going to lose a lot of your people as a result.
Yeah, they found out to the price of somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 men that those 300 guys were going to fight. So. That's fascinating, what well-motivated people can do.
The number, if you happen to be listening on a computer, grab a phone and dial 701-801-0829. Again, 701-801-0829. And when you hear the show on your phone, dial 5. That'll put you in line to talk, and I'll put you on the air with Ted Sumner. And anything at all you want to discuss, any questions you want to ask are more than welcome. And you could very well be the winner of a hardcover copy of Deep Cover Cop. And that is the true story told by Ted Sumner, and I had the honor of being able to do a little transcribing. And not a word of it is fiction. It is all truth. And you're going to find out that truth is a lot stranger than fiction. How many times did I ask you, Ted, how in the world did you get out of this alive? Time after time, as we go through these real-life events that Ted undertook as a police officer, as a deep cover cop. I'd shake my head and ask him how he managed to get out alive. I look for stories from real life police officers, and usually they're pretty tame. For example, one story says I worked in a pretty busy county for the sheriff's department, as well as given a later day to appear in court. However, due to his vehicle was impounded, since it was our standard procedure, our counties had a lot of crime. Our county jail faces overcrowding, and oftentimes the criminals lodged get released early. Well, we worked 12-hour shifts, and I worked the weekend night shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So one busy Saturday night about 11 p.m., one of our deputies stopped a guy who was driving crazy and ended up arresting him for DUI. Now, usually when somebody's arrested here for DUI, they're lodged in the county jail and released once they sober up. And of course, working a slow graveyard shift up in the mountains, I stopped a car where I thought the occupant may have been in possession of a gun. So I called for another deputy, and soon after I heard my partner answer up on the radio and began to respond. Well, he was just around the corner from me when I heard him turn on the radio and say, "I copy, show me en route." And then he gave a expletive, never mind, and then dead silence. My heart stopped, because all I could do is guess and speculate on what could have happened to him. And that's how this story started. Unfortunately, I don't have the rest of it. But that kind of thing is not unusual, is it, Ted?
No, it's very dynamic. It you can go through the night and nothing happens, and you go through another night and just everything breaks loose. You just don't know. I was working off duty just to make some extra money, working security in the emergency room at the San Jose Hospital. It was right downtown, and where the ambulances pulled in, well, anybody could just walk right in. So they, after dark, they wanted security there. And a man was there, his son was injured, and he looked at me and he said, "You got a real tough job, don't you?" And I said, "Well, sometimes it's very tough, and other times it's not. But again, like Russ said, they don't pay you for what you do, they pay you for what you might have to do. And that includes an awful lot of real estate.
No question. And the fact is that when adversity strikes, it strikes with a vengeance.
Well, that's for certain. I remember several situations where, particularly after I left narcotics, I was well versed with the habits and characteristics of heroin addicts, particularly. And now here you have something that's highly addicting. If they don't get the drug within a certain number of hours, they will begin a process called withdrawal, and it's very, very uncomfortable. It's painful. You're sick. You throw up. You lose control of your bodily functions. It's a miserable situation, and it takes a couple days to get through that. And they would rather do anything than suffer that, which is in many cases how we were able to turn these people into informants. They would rather give up a lesser dealer. They wouldn't give you their main dealer. They had to have him. But they would rather give up a lesser dealer than go through that withdrawal. But several times while on the SWAT team, while trailing somebody who they used to commit what we called addiction supporting crimes. The most benign of which would be credit cards and petty theft in stores and things, what they call boosting. A little bit worse was residential burglaries. They'd break into houses when nobody was home. They didn't want to break in while people were home. They just did not want an encounter. But probably the most dangerous were the ones who would commit armed robbery, where they'd go in and stick a gun in somebody's face in a store, liquor store, or someplace, and steal their money. So we were on a number of occasions trailing an armed robber who there's always a good chance an armed robber is going to be an addict. And we broke in on them on a public restroom at a gas station, one time at an apartment complex in the recreation center. It was obvious who we were. We were in uniform, and they had that syringe ready to go. They were going to shoot up, and they would fight us tooth and nail to get that thing into their arm. They did not want to miss that shot because they knew what was on the other side of it, and they were taking the shot because they were probably close to going in to the first stages of withdrawal. I actually had one female. She couldn't get the needle to her arm because we had a hold of her, so she turned and squirted it into her mouth so she could at least get some of the drug.
Huh.
Withdrawal is a very, very painful and uncomfortable thing, and they want to avoid that. But we did our master's thesis on that, on the addiction supporting crimes, both Russ, who was here, and I. And we found that you could break it down to those four things, and that's how they supported their addiction. So when my commander ordered me and two other undercovers he wanted to see what would happen if we took off the street level dealers. They know that the street level dealers are mostly addicts, and in many cases will inform to avoid going to jail. Whereas the higher up in the chain of supply that you go, those people are not a danger to inform on people below them. The street level people, who are the most paranoid, they have no fear. All they know is that they have now an opportunity to move up and maybe make more money. So we put this program into to practice, we took down over 700 street level dealers in a roundup after working it for, I think we worked it for about 4 months.
Wow.
And we created a virtual crime wave in San Jose. What happened was these addiction supporting crimes rose exponentially, or increased exponentially. So what happened was now the street level people that we took off, the people above them are afraid that they're going to be informing, so they're afraid to sell anything. The cost of the drug then went up. As Russ said, supply and demand applies to illegal industry as well as legal business. The cost went up. People had to commit more crimes to get the drug.
I want to come back to that because that opens a very interesting channel of discussion. But we've got a caller. Let's go to in the 801 area, 577 prefix. Caller, your first name. You're on with Ted Sumner.
Bill, this is Bill.
Welcome, Bill.
I love what you're talking about. When you're talking about the Hells Angels, I've never had anything to do with them. I've always tried to stay away from stuff like that. But we were raised in a pretty tough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, and my older brother. It's pretty hard to stay away from trouble in an area like that. My parents moved down from Utah, and my dad thought it'd be a good idea for us to be raised in a tough neighborhood to make us tough. That was his line of thinking. And it was by choice. It didn't have anything to do with finances. This is what he wanted to do. So, yeah, we got tough, that's for sure.
You would have to in a situation like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was getting chased left and right, and of course my dad, who's long gone, he's, I don't know, a couple cans short of a six-pack in my opinion, but his way of thinking, but my older brother had to get quite resourceful on how to survive, and to make a long story short, he ended up riding with the Hells Angels when he was 16.
Ooh.
And so kind of out of the frying pan into the fire, but one of the things the neighborhood gang did was they finally caught him. He was quite the physical specimen, my older brother. He was a safety for the all-state all-player in high school in football. He was the safety, so he was pretty good physical specimen. And but yeah, you get caught in the wrong place with enough of them, and you're going to be in trouble. And they dumped a can of gas on him one night and lit him up.
Ouch.
Burned a hole in his throat. And that was kind of it for him. He was pretty convinced on their sincerity of their threats at that point.
Yeah.
So he ended up riding with the Hells Angels out of not knowing what to do. So because he was so young, he was kind of looked as kind of like a novelty item for him. And it wasn't long before he was riding right alongside Sonny. I can't remember his last name, the
Barger.
president. Yeah. And his story was quite credible because it was true. And so they had him in places where he was completely trusted. They had him driving a limousine for him at times, some pretty high-profile meetings. And he was quite shocked on who was, I mean, even at that young age, he was quite shocked on the type of people they were meeting with. People who he recognized as high-profile politicians, along with everybody else you would think a motorcycle gang president would, or that type would meet with.
Bill, do you have something you can write with?
Go ahead.
Do you have something you can write with and something you can write on?
Oh, hold on one second here. He's been passed away now for a number of years. But we worked together for close to 3 years, and things were slow. We talk about the old neighborhood, things like that, and that would come up. Yeah, I've got something to write with now.
Okay, great. I want you to write this down, please. Mills Crenshaw, that's MILLSCRENSHAW dot CSH, phonetically that's Charles Sam Henry, at gmail.com. So it's millscrenshaw.csh at gmail.com. What I would like you to do is, at your convenience, email me your address, and I will send you a copy of Deep Cover Cop, Compliments of Ted Sumner.
Well, thank you. I'd love to read that book. Sounds very intriguing.
Oh, you're going to love it. But I warn you, don't start it if you got something really important to do the next day, because you're going to be up.
It sounds like a lot of stories my brother used to share. I mean, once you get involved with a situation like that, they kind of, they always know who you are and kind of where you're at, kind of a thing. And even though he joined the military spontaneously, even when he got out, they knew who he was and where he was and things like that. And he didn't want anything to do with them after the military. But yeah. He was lucky. Nothing happened to him in the military. But anyway.
Well, appreciate your call. Don't be a stranger. Want to hear about?
Oh no, I'm always listening. I'm a latecomer, Mills. I've been listening to you since the late '70s.
Hey, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You betcha. Thanks, Mills.
We have another caller in the 512 area. Is this another guest, Ted?
Yes, this is.
Caller, your first name? Oh, yeah. Once again, it's 512 area, and the prefix is 925.
Hey, this is Brian. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brian.
Yes.
Welcome.
Perfect.
Yeah, I invited Brian on. He is a robbery detective for the Austin Police Department. Been around a while. He was a member of SEAL Team 3 when he was in the Navy. He was a good friend of Chris Kyle's. And, I wanted to get his insight on some of the things that's going on. Militarization of the police. Having been a frontline military man as well as a police officer, what do you think that the police need to get the job done that they're not getting? And just see what an experienced frontline officer has to say about that.
Unfortunately, Brian, I don't think they will allow M1 Abrams tanks.
No, I don't think so. I think we're probably off to a pretty good start, though. The police departments are a paramilitary force, and I can understand that people might have some concerns with regards to some of the equipment that the police department is getting, but the police departments need to stay on top of technology with regards to weapons and equipment, just like anybody else does, to fight crime effectively. And I don't believe that police departments are being militarized. I don't know if that's the term that I would use. I think that they're just seeking out the best equipment that they can get their hands on, of course, to fight crime. But do you get a sense that probably your audience has some kind of a concern about?
Well, that issue is certainly being raised by the mainstream media, but when you're facing attacks with an Uzi, you've got to at least have an M116 to respond with, I would think.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
the first responders, as what happened in L.A. when the guys were jocked up with bulletproof armor and automatic weapons, the first responders, without some sort of tactical weapon, they're in trouble, and they're like the skirmishers in the Civil War. Those were the guys who got run over, just trying to warn everybody else that they were being attacked. I mean, you can't just toss these guys away. They've got to be able to react and respond with some effective means.
Well, and the bad guys anymore have access to some pretty
They got
heavy
everything we
weapons.
got.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we've got a bunch of politicians who are weak-kneed, lily-livered cowards, in my personal opinion, and they don't seem to want to have law enforcement equipped to handle these situations.
Well, I think it's getting better. Police officers are your first line of defense, and they need kind of firepower to at least be on equal footing with some of the high-power rifles that are, getting in the hands of bad guys these days. And, they need to be able to stand their ground and to survive until a tactical unit can arrive on scene. But for my agency in particular, patrol officers are starting to get issued patrol rifles, to carry in their cars. And like Ted was saying, I mean, this was all born out of a response of what happened out in California. That what was that, Ted? That specific shooting? Where was that located?
That was in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And they were fully bulletproof armor on, and they had a heck of a time bringing those guys down. Plus, they were mobile; they were moving, so it wasn't as if they were waiting there for a tactical team to respond. Officers were they were going in piecemeal, and a lot of officers got hurt on that particular day. Whereas if they had tactical weapons, they might have had a better chance. And I mean, people have the mistaken notion that, well, they're not going to use the tactical weapons on a family dispute. They're not going to take the tactical weapons to break up a high school party. But when somebody else is attacking, as what happened in Dallas a few weeks ago, that's the only way you can respond. Now, I've been out at the range, shooting pistols when somebody else is shooting a rifle next to me. There's no comparison. You don't want to try to take that rifle on with a pistol. You've got to have the firepower to be able to have a fighting chance. And the sad thing is, but it's I say sad, it's a reality, is most police officers won't run away from that situation because they aren't sufficiently armed. They'll still respond. That's just the nature of the men we hire to do that job.
Well, there's another aspect to this. So we've now had incidents that have been created by radical Islamists. And one of the rising tactics is to go after responders. In other words, they'll blow something up and then they'll wait to attack the people who come to clean up. And we can't allow that. We just can't.
Well, and here's something that'll help you to sleep well at night. Greek border guards just confiscated 52 tons of guns and ammunition in 14 Connex containers marked as furniture that was being shipped to Muslim immigrants. Connex is Yavix Manufacturing is an American company that was being sent to them in Fort Myer, Florida. They're licensed to do business there, and it was coming in as furniture. So these if you wonder why the immigrants that are coming in are not families and children and women that are getting out of Syria, they all seem to be young military-age men. There's something going on.
Wearing very expensive sneakers.
Wearing very expensive sneakers paid for by George Soros. So, but no, Brian, am I right? I mean, just because you're outgunned, police officers don't run away from the situation. I mean, it's like the old ride to the sound of the cannons. They go where there's trouble. That's just what they do by nature.
Yeah.
And in a situation like what we had in LA, they'll be there. They'll be on the scene, and it, under firepowered or not.
Right. That's their sworn duty, and that's what they're going to do. Yeah, you bet.
So, I mean, as a society, I mean, we owe it to these people to at least arm them sufficiently to at least have a reasonable expectation of emerging from the encounter alive.
Well, one of the other aspects of your question, Brian, has to do with the media portrayal of law enforcement officers. They seem to relish portraying law enforcement officers as the bad guys, and yet I read stories like the one from a man by the name of Jack Frew, who complained that he was, no, he didn't really complain, but he shared the fact that he had been roaring down an empty 6-lane road in his local town, and that he had been doing 120 miles an hour. He turned off the road and headed home, and he saw a car coming at him really fast. Turned out to be a cop. The guy pulled him over, and the officer was very cool from the beginning, paid compliments to the STI, the hog that the guy was riding, and he understood why he was speeding and continued to talk to him about the dangers of street racing and the fact that he had done a little of it himself when he was young and had a muscle car. And then he lectured him about speeding and told him he could impound the car, etc., but ultimately just let him go. And that day he said, I had great respect for the cops. Quote, they aren't all douches, close quote. And I have found in my experience when I get lead-footed, if you're decent with the officer who pulls you over, he'll do his job, but he's not going to rub it in, or he's not going to give you a bad time. And I think more and more.
Sure. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that generally speaking, we like to take just the amount of enforcement action that's necessary that we believe is going to correct the problem. You know, I mean, if you're talking to a guy and he's a reasonable person and you're explaining to him what happened and they seem to be very compliant, understandable, and respectable, it's like, hey, you know, this guy gets it. I think he's going to comply, and you cut the guy loose with a warning. Once people start getting, argumentative and or not wanting to comply initially with some things that you're asking them to do, which would be obviously for their safety, then, it's like, hey, maybe the only thing that's going to get through to this person is maybe cutting them some paperwork. And, in most extreme cases, it's like, okay, obviously nothing is going to get through to this guy, which you obviously, I mean, you have the ability to arrest and impound the car. So it's all completely driven based on the person that you're dealing with, to be quite honest.
I've never understood this growing rift. It seems almost contrived because we've got black cops who are being shot along with white cops, and they always seem to blame the police officer. It's never the crowd's fault or never the bad guy's fault. I don't understand that.
that's probably what the narrative that the media is pushing. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, well, the police, they refer to the police as this large, faceless, nameless entity, and it's easy to dehumanize something with no face, no name, no family. And the simple fact is that police officers are just like anybody else. They get up, they go to work, they come home, they have families, they have kids. They do the things that normal people do. So it's again, when you can just label it the police.
Well, and these guys or gals, as the case may be, are putting their lives on the line to keep us all safe, and that it seems to me that should engender a level of respect.
Yeah.
What they have found now with all of this really just ruthless criticism of the police and police tactics, the thing that you hear coming up all the time on the news is the stop and frisk. And frankly, that's a police officer's right. I mean, the police officers are the only people in our society, and this includes judges, presidents, Army general, anybody, the only people in our society who are empowered to stop somebody, detain them, question them, demand ID, simply based on probable cause. They have that right. A lot of people don't like that. Young macho men, they want to challenge that authority. They don't like authority anyway. Most of them. That's why they're in trouble. Now, what they have found is because of this criticism and some of the I can't characterize it as anything other than wrongful prosecution of police officers in many of the large cities. The police are not going into the ghetto neighborhoods. They can't stop and frisk. They can't shake these people to see who the bad guys are. So they're just not doing anything. Ultimately, crime has risen dramatically. Violent crime, particularly, the number of murders is up 54% in Chicago over last year. And but they don't want to be told that they have to stop. What are you doing here at 3 a.m? You're 16 years old. Hey, I'm a tough guy. You can't tell me what to do.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I do tell you what to do. You scream I'm a racist. The next thing I know, I'm up in front of a disciplinary board being told that I shouldn't be doing that. Well, they're reaping what they sow. And violent crime is up in these types of neighborhoods. And go ahead.
I was just gonna. It's fine for these guys to not like the police or to challenge what's going on, but there's an avenue to challenge this, but it's not on the street. The street's not the place to do it. And what I mean by that is, there's the court system, there's the police monitor's office. If you feel like that there's something going on that's not legitimate, there are avenues to express that and to bring things under investigation. But on the street is not the time and place.
Well, let me ask you both, since you're both you're both experienced officers. Everybody agrees that there are maybe a tiny handful of bad cops, people who really shouldn't be carrying a badge and a gun. But my experience is that honest, dedicated law enforcement officers want to get rid of those jerks every bit as much as the rest of society does. Am I wrong?
That's very true. And it's very difficult to completely vet every single officer, with regards to everything that might be an issue with them, with their character, or with them in their personal life or whatnot. So it's always possible for a bad apple to slip in here and there. But the greater majority of these officers are really good men and women, and they're doing a righteous job out there. And sometimes you are going to get those bad actors, right? But again, if they're not doing their job correctly and they're violating your rights, there's an avenue to challenge that. But once you start bucking these officers out on the street and not complying with commands, that's when bad things start to happen.
Yeah, the simple fact is the police are not going to lose. It's just not permitted. I mean, as you said, they're our last line of defense. Society can't roll over. So, and I, was the subject of a number of internal affairs investigations where there were allegations of misconduct brought against me. And believe me, those guys are thorough. When I was on, we did not have the right to remain silent. We had to tell them what happened in minute detail. So, and they weren't easy on us. I mean, until they got to the bottom of things, they did what they had to do to get the information and figure out what had happened. So, I mean, there are avenues for the citizenry to take if they feel they're being treated wrong. But again, it's not on the street, and it's not in direct defiance of the lawful order of a policeman.
And that's where cameras are really coming into play these days, and I completely applaud that, even on the body camera side of it, because, like I said, these officers the greater majority of them are doing really good work, and I can guarantee you that with body cameras or the patrol car cameras, that evidence is going to exonerate officers from a lot more complaints than it is going to find them guilty of misconduct. There's no doubt.
And yet, what they're finding is that the numbers of assaults on police officers are on the rise where there are body cameras. They're still sorting through the data, but some of the theories are that the police officer, knowing that he's being taped, is not as authoritative, and the subject perceives weakness there. I don't know exactly. I'm following those studies, though.
Well, and it's fascinating to me. We have these incidents here in the States, and yet it's nothing compared to what it's like in the rest of the world. I was reading a story, for example, from this guy who was at the Mongol rally last year, and he's from Slovakia, and when a Ukrainian cop saw British plates, they requested financial compensation for the privilege of not arresting us. And then there are the Kazakhstan cops who chased him down once like a man possessed, then forced a truck driver to turn around and buy us a watermelon. Seriously. While another was shocked that we'd never eaten horse meat and immediately drove us to his favorite restaurant to try some. I mean, these are some of the stories that come from other parts of the world. And these idiots in some parts of the country who try and say our cops are the bad guys, they don't understand at all how good we've got it.
No. Well, and another of the questions I wanted to bring up to Brian is, there is, in the wave of these shootings, there's a lot of criticism of the police use of force, and they are suggesting non-lethal tools, such as mace, tasers,
Bean bags.
they're suggesting rubber bullets. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that the less lethal options definitely have their place. I think it's good to have them. I mean, we're in the business of saving lives, even if it's the suspect's life. If there is a way to get through a situation by saving a life, I mean, that's what we're going to do. But it's not completely necessary to immediately go to a less lethal option. I mean, sometimes it's just not going to be available. But I mean, tactically speaking, you have to be very aware of what your situation is and if it even warrants such a thing.
Exactly.
It's a great tool, but I mean, it's sometimes it's simply not an option.
Well, do you think that if officers have a non-lethal option, like a taser or a chemical mace, do you think they're more likely to use that when they could just go hands-on and probably control the situation easily? That they fall back to that in the face of what would be normally considered minor resistance?
Sure, I can see that as a possibility. I mean, when you've got all of these things on your back belt, if you will, it can be tempting to want to scramble to try to pick one of those up when you can easily deal with the situation much quicker.
Well,
And
Brian,
by the
you're
same
from
token, are they likely to go to something inadequate when a greater force is required?
Right, and we've had a situation like that before, where an armed suspect was being chased, and the officer got alone with the suspect, and his first reaction was to pull his taser because he simply couldn't see the guy's hands yet. He thought he was going to give him commands, and the guy rolls over and displays a gun, and the gun went click. So he had a misfire. Well, lucky for the officer, obviously. He was able to deploy a taser and take him into custody that way, but the officer was very lucky. And I believe that's a training issue, obviously. But
well, speaking of training issues, you probably are familiar with Ted Sumner's skill set. And it just seems to me that if police officers got some basic fundamental training in hand-to-hand combat, that there are a lot of situations they could handle without turning to weapons at all. One of the things that just drove me up the wall was to hear about in a black ghetto area, a woman armed with a butter knife was shot by a law enforcement officer. That does not make any sense at all. And that's the kind of event that I think creates some of the chaos that we see in society. What do you think, Brian?
Well, you cite that incident, and there's a bunch of questions that come to mind just thinking about that. First of all, I wasn't there. You weren't there.
No.
The officer saw a knife. Could he determine that it was a butter knife? We don't know. But a person can close distance with a knife very quickly, and believe it or not, our Kevlar vests don't protect against edged weapons. So, I mean, if someone's going to display a knife, then the obvious response is to come out with lethal force, and not necessarily use it, but at least have it at the ready.
Sure.
I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with the story, but if she started to advance at this officer, with that knife, and he was absolutely justified in using lethal force to stop the threat.
Well, my question has nothing to do with justification, because I agree he was justified, and I believe it was so ruled. But from a community relations standpoint, that's deadly.
Well, it certainly doesn't show very
perhaps,
well
but
in the news.
Perhaps, but in my opinion, that's a culture issue. And I'm sorry, I have a family that I want to go home to at the end of the day. So if the community wants to react that way, there's no whole lot that I can do about that. But like I said, I believe that's just the culture of the community. But I mean that officer has to do what has to do in order to make it home.
Do you think that there is sufficient training, at least in your department, in hand-to-hand combat?
We do have a hand-to-hand combat phase in our training. It's pretty decent, but the problem is that once you get out of the academy, that's the only exposure that you're going to get to it. So we don't have any mandatory refreshment or anything like that. You can sign up for a refresher class on your own, but it's not something that we're required to keep our skills up on. The only thing that we're required to qualify on is with our duty weapon annually, and that's for my agency. And we're also required to practice with that weapon monthly. But to practice hand-to-hand combat on a regular basis is totally voluntary. And I've worked for supervisors who have told me, hey, I would prefer, before you break out that stick or before you break out that mace or whatever the case may be, if it requires force, just go hands-on with the guy.
Right.
It's a lot faster. You've been trained to do it, and it's justified by our policy. So, but you'll have other supervisors who will be like, hey, if it's within policy, then it's fair game. So, break out your taser or break out your pepper spray, whatever you think that you need. But there's some supervisors who are very against that and would rather you just go for a punch, to protect yourself as opposed to using a less lethal option. But like I said, that's not something that my agency regularly practices, and I honestly don't know of any of them that do. I think that it would be very helpful.
I agree. I always found that if I went hands-on, I did it quick and got control of the situation. It was generally much more effective. Now, the only times that I was ever involved with the use of mace is when somebody else maced a suspect I was trying to subdue, and I got maced along with him. And I don't like the smell of that stuff. I didn't like it when I was in the Army, and I don't like it now. So I didn't appreciate that. Again, like I say, if they go to that, well, it may be too much too soon or too little too late. When you're hands-on, there were times in my own experience where there was a weapon. It wasn't exactly clear that there was a weapon, but it was very clear there was something wrong with this person, and they were about to do something. And by going hands-on with them, I got control of the weapon before they were able to deploy it. Does that always work? Well, no, probably not. But for me, it was the best option.
And with any degree of training, most adult males are capable of handling a bladed weapon quite easily.
weapons are one of the only things that are still deadly in a passive mode. You can fall on a bladed weapon and hurt yourself very badly.
True.
So now, another question that I had, Brian, was what kind of training do you get in communications, negotiations, that kind of thing? What you say, how you say it, has a very, very great deal to do with how people respond, not just how you comport yourself or the bearing that you have. Do they actually train police officers these days in how to speak, what to say, that kind of thing?
Yeah, yes, they do. In the academy, you touch on that, and you get a lot of role play experience in that regard. But with the academy, you're drinking from the fire hose, and these are new officers that are learning a whole lot of stuff in a relatively short amount of time, and so you get pretty good at it for a while. But the majority of your training comes when you're with your field training officer out on the street, and it's really the majority of your verbal judo, if you will, comes by just real world experience, and there is an art to it, but there are additional courses that are offered that you can take, that you're encouraged to take, that allow you to enhance those communication abilities and to de-escalate things verbally, and which are very effective. And the majority of our patrol officers have that training, but it's not something that's mandatory outside of the academy. So I think that it is something that could be worked on a little bit more actively on the academy side. But like I said, the most valuable training that you get is when you're with your training officer, taking calls out on the street. And,
well, do they give you a template, so to speak, on how to engage somebody verbally to defuse potentially violent situation? Like, obviously you're going to encounter situations where there's alcohol involved or drugs, but other than that, a lot of times it's just emotionally charged. And if you can bring those defuse and bring those situations under control, is there a template of methodology that you follow?
We are not given a specific template or methodology, and we're given one somewhat for traffic stop violations, because those are fairly predictable, even though there's no such thing as a
routine traffic stop.
Yeah, a routine traffic stop. Those are fairly easy to control and gain compliance verbally, but as you know from your experience, the rest of what you're going to experience out on the street is entirely random, and I don't care how many years you spend on the street, you'll never see it all, even though you think that you have. You're right. Now I've probably seen it all, and then all you have to do is wait a couple of weeks and you'll see something else that you can't believe. And so it's kind of hard to have a template for every conceivable scenario. But just to simply answer your question, we our agency, just as an example, has not provided a certain starting point, or but I've been out of the academy for 9 years now, and perhaps they're doing something differently that I'm not aware of. But when I came through, we weren't afforded anything like that. It was just, we were expected to treat people a certain way, and your own communication skills that you brought to bear was essentially what you had to go by.
The Captain Ron Sanchez, who was the commander of the Hollywood Division for LAPD before he retired, now teaches a martial arts class. It's a seminar. He can do it, in a 2-day, 1-day, half-day but it's speaks to how to defuse situations. Now, this is strictly a self-defense tool, not so much for officers, but a lot of it, a great deal of it, is the body language, maintaining the distance, what distance is safe, what you say, how you say it. It's a pretty good course that he gives. And then, of course, he's teaching all martial artists. If that doesn't work, well, you get down to it. I mean, it's, but, as they say, any fight you can walk away from is a good one.
Sure. And, if there are officers out there who, upon making contact with anybody for whatever reason, are automatically looking for some kind of confrontation, then those aren't the people that we want out on the street.
Well, no.
But it's very, and from my experience on patrol here in Central Texas, I mean, that's something that I've never seen. But, I'm sure that there's guys out there who, maybe they just came off a really rough call and they're all amped up and they get on the next one and they just don't start off well.
Which speaks to another thing that, the police are criticized oftentimes for the way they act. You don't know what happened, what's happening in his life. You don't know what happened that day, and you don't know what happened 10 minutes ago. He may have just come off a life and death situation, and now here you want to give him a rough way to go, and he's still a little bit emotionally frazzled by what happened. You may not see him at his absolute best. These are things, and what's the officer going to do? Go to his safe zone for a while? No. The radio's going crazy. The city's falling apart. Get to your next call. So,
right.
these are things that very often police officers are unfairly criticized for something, and again, you don't know what just happened. In addition, go ahead.
It truly is a difficult profession, and this may seem surprising to you, but my experience as a Navy SEAL was very challenging in many regards. But I have to be honest with you that doing police work and policing American civilians is much more challenging, because obviously the rules that you have to operate by are much different, more stringent, and it's simply more dangerous. This may sound funny, but I mean, I was deployed a few times into some really bad places, and I've had to draw my weapon and point my weapon in self-defense many more times as a police officer than I ever had to do in special operations. And you just never know what you're going to get. And when you go out there, and anytime that officers are dealing with people, it's typically on their worst day. And that's the exposure that officers get day in and day out on the job. And
it's not even day to day. It can be moment to moment that things change.
Right.
This brings up another question, Brian. What about ride-alongs for media? It seems to me that if all of the media reporters had an opportunity to spend a night riding along with an officer to see what they put up with, it could give them a whole different perspective.
I agree. I think it's an outstanding idea. I would highly encourage any personnel in the media to do a ride-along with an officer. We actually have some here in Austin that choose to do that. It's a great experience for them. But at the end of the day, I mean, obviously you see, the media is going to still write the stories that sell, and they're going to spin things the way that that's going to get people stirred up, in my opinion. So,
Unfortunately, the news is a product. And
yeah, I mean, it's the entertainment industry, so
And if it bleeds, it leads.
there you go.
that's correct.
But no, right along a little firsthand. In my opinion, the media misses a lot of opportunities to show the police at their very best, and really to recognize some heroic behavior on their part, and that's unfortunate.
And I think that's somewhat the fault of management in the police departments is, the media will always get fed, the controversial stuff or things that officers have been involved in or what have you. But the management never, in my opinion, sends people stories of all the great things that officers are doing on a daily basis. I mean, because I guarantee you, they far outnumber anything that could be labeled as potentially controversial. And it would be really helpful if the public could actually see the fantastic things that officers are doing out on the street on a daily basis. Just taking a few calls, a few stories from the day, and just be like, hey, this officer did this officer did that. And I think that it would greatly impact the community, to understand that, officers are the good guys out there. Every now and then you're going to have your officer-involved shooting, or you're going to have somebody who makes a bad decision or whatnot, but they are very few and far between with regards to, what is actually happening out on those streets. And it's kind of heartbreaking, because you know it, and you live it, but it's like the public gets fed something entirely different,
Well, you're absolutely correct. I mean, and even the people who are demonizing the police, even Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, who do they call when they're in trouble? Well, they call the police. And they expect them to be there. They expect them to protect them and take care of them. Do they do it? You darn right they do.
It's interesting you say that. I've had a lot of people tell me when I was working the street, you get in front of people who just simply don't like the police, and that's fine. That's okay. And you try to ask them questions and talk to them about what happened, and they just don't want to talk to you. It's like, sorry, I don't like cops. And I would usually respond by, oh, well, you mean until you need one, right? And then I'm always met with silence when I say that.
Oh,
Well, yeah, you've just pulled their pants down and they're standing there and don't know what to say.
and isn't it interesting that the most verbal anti-Second Amendment people always seem to be surrounded by armed guards?
Yes, but I mean, listen, when I was a young officer, was working overtime providing security for Sly and the Family Stone. And this was in San Jose. And he didn't like cops. He didn't want us anywhere near him. So we handled the perimeter. We handled the gate crashers. We arrested the drunks and everything else. And he hired a black security agency, the Richardson Security Agency from Oakland, to provide his personal security. Well, guess what? We found Sly knocked out and about $30,000 worth of his jewelry stolen from him by one of the security guards who was supposed to be protecting him.
That's interesting.
And who did he call? He called the police.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah, Elvis, for example, had as his personal bodyguard my instructor, Ed Parker. Anytime he would travel on tour, he would insist on having Ed travel with him. And some of the video that you'll see of him walking down a street, you'll see Parker immediately behind him. And I've always thought it very interesting that the rich and famous, now Elvis, of course, was pro Second Amendment. He wasn't anti, but I've noticed that Hillary Clinton, for example, is surrounded by Secret Service and armed private security guards. And she's about as anti-Second Amendment as anyone you'll ever find in your life.
Well, you've read some of the accounts of the treatment she heaped upon our Secret Service detail when all they were trying to do was protect her.
Exactly.
But like Brian said, I don't like cops. Well, you don't know any. How can you make that? And yet people will do that. And generally, these people have a problem with authority also. And, again, the police are civil authority. So, I can see where people with authority issues might feel that way. Nonetheless, when they meet somebody who's a police officer and when they're in trouble, their attitude will change. They will become the atheist in the foxhole.
Apt description.
Well, I want to thank Brian. He was on babysitting duty tonight.
Now that's tough duty.
He had a meeting and he had to juggle being our guest with babysitting 3 kids, and you did a great job. We really appreciate you coming on, Brian.
Yeah, I told them they better behave, and they did a great job. So I'm gonna have to go get them some ice cream or something like that.
Hey, there you go.
Absolutely. We appreciate
I
everything you've contributed.
All right. Hey, well, thank you guys very much for having me on.
Thank you.
And can we have you on again at some future time if we need your particular input?
Yeah, you bet. I'd be happy to.
Thank
Really
you, Brian.
appreciate you coming on.
Okay, guys. Thank you. I'll have a good night.
Take care.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care.
Another great show, Ted. You provide outstanding guests.
Well, when you get to be my age, and you've been in the middle of it, you get to meet people like this.
Yeah, you old guys, I just don't know.
Hey, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
But and I'm just grateful that they've been willing to come on and share their opinions and their experience with us. I mean, we could have Russ on. He didn't even begin to scratch the surface of the stuff he's been through. He didn't even tell anything about Vietnam and some of the close calls he had there.
We'll have him back, but I want you to keep trying to get the heads of the police unions, because I think this is a medium that they need to explore.
Well, and I'm going to go back to my old agency and probably start with some of the former presidents of the Peace Officers Association, who I know personally, where I can twist arms if I need to, and get them on. And there are some that were far more politically assertive than others, who can really give us a good idea of some of the various workings and machinations of the administrations of police departments and state and local governments. So I think we have no shortage of topics which to attack here on Thursday nights.
I agree. And coming up on the 14th and 15th, we've got that guns and Bible gathering here of all independent voters, and I'd like you to talk that up if you would among your, maybe you can get some of your students to make the trip. I think that'd be
Sure.
a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. That's for sure. That's,
And we can do a show from the steps of the state capitol with all of the independent voters who show up with their Bibles and their guns. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
show up with your Bibles and your guns.
Well, the president said that's what we cling to, so we don't want to make a liar out of the president.
Yeah, no, that I don't think we could do that. I think it's already happened.
Very accomplished, I would add.
Yeah, oh yeah, he's good at it. He's made it a science, that's for sure.
Did you happen to,
as
Ted, did you happen to see the vice presidential debate?
yes, I did.
Your comments?
Well, I thought Pence was quite polished, quite considered. He's a very intelligent man. I believe that his values, I believe that he spoke the truth and reflected his values. And I think that he is the kind of man that I think we need in government service. I didn't really care for Kane. It was obvious he was on the attack. Didn't really want to discuss substantive issues, but rather wanted to see if he could get, well, I'll use the term I use for Donald Trump, get him to chase squirrels. Like the Labrador that you take outside, and he just can't help himself. He's got to chase squirrels, even though he knows that he's not supposed to. And that's what Trump did in the debate against Hillary. And he could not get Pence to bite. He stayed on topic. He was, I thought he did a great job.
Yeah, I thought Kane's 72 interruptions were sophomoric.
It was. It got to the point where, I was almost embarrassed for the idiot, except that he was the one, bringing it on himself. So, very, very unbecoming for a vice presidential candidate.
I almost wish Pence were running for the presidency.
Well, maybe he will be the next candidate.
Well, it seems to me, though, on the basis of that performance alone, knowing that one of these two men will be a heartbeat away from the presidency, I don't think you dare vote for Hillary for the fear that Kane might end up in that position. We know that her health is questionable, and on that alone, it would seem to me that would make a decision very simple.
Well, yeah, I don't want either one of them, frankly. I don't want Hillary or Kane.
Well, I agree. And all the more reason for supporting either Trump or somebody like Rocky Giardini, who's the independent American candidate. Right. Most people are not at all familiar yet with Rocky, but he will... Giordani. Sorry, I always mispronounce his last name. Thank you. My producer just corrected me. It's Giordani. And Rocky is a plain-spoken man who knows whereof he speaks.
Absolutely.
And he will be here on both the 14th and 15th. We're going to give every single candidate who shows up an opportunity to speak to the independent-minded voter who I think will make a final decision on who's going to be president. But that's just one man's opinion.
Well, and that's a valid and worthwhile opinion. So it should be very. I think this is going to be great on the 14th and 15th. So, and I don't think there's anybody, quite frankly, that Rocky can't stand up to. So, even if he can make the other candidates dance, that's good.
And very worthwhile.
So here on a parting note, I want to just, we talk about things that are going on in the world and how people are acting. I just wanted to throw this one out. A reproduction of the Temple of Baal, B-A-A-L, is coming to New York Times Square next month as a tribute to the 2,000-year-old original structure that was destroyed by ISIS last year in Palmyra, Syria. The reproduction will be made using a 3D printer producing life-size models of the temple's entrance. Officials say those models will be installed in both New York City and London's Trafalgar Square this spring. Many are speaking out against putting up a monument in honor of a temple that promoted the worship of a false god. In an article for the World Net Daily, Matt Barber explains some of the elements of Baal worship. Now listen to this. Ritualistic Baal worship, in sum, looked a little like this. Adults would gather around the altar of Baal. Infants would then be burned alive as sacrificial offering to the deity. Amid horrific screams and the stench of charred human flesh, congregants, men and women alike, would then engage in bisexual orgies. That's pretty bad.
Well, and historically, it was the precedent to the destruction of the nation of Israel, because they turned from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to worship this false god Baal, and they paid a terrible price for it. What idiocy is involved in reproducing this false god in New York City, of all places? There are already writers who are convinced that the scriptural reference to Babylon in the latter days refers to America. And
I have heard that. I'm not exactly certain on that one, but
well, we are told again and again in the scriptures, God will not be mocked. I cannot imagine a more open desecration than this. Can you?
I cannot. As he refers to it, I can't envision blowing smoke in God's face more flagrantly than this. But I've got the article. We'll see where that goes, and we can discuss that next week.
We'll do it. I'll look forward to it, and it has been a pleasure, as always, to share this time with you, Ted.
I have enjoyed myself, and appreciate your efforts, and we'll do it again next week.
Look forward to it. Thank you, sir, and good night.
Sir.